All right.
Oh, yeah.
Terrific.
Don't all stand up. No, it's okay.
Some are sitting, some are standing. I'm psyched to do this because although I do business news coverage of Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio, I was once a sports writer, started a basketball magazine once upon a time. I feel like what's going on when your role as a commentator and your role doing, well, what are you
what
doing
am I
now?
doing? I don't know.
Why don't you start there? So post ESPN,
Yeah.
you helped start 30/30.
30, yep.
You said the 30/30, which has been fantastic sports journalism.
Thank you.
Grantland, fantastic sports journalism. Your podcast, beloved and weird and great sports journalism. But
Certainly weird.
now with HBO and Time Warner, what's next?
Well, I'm launching a TV show for them next spring and getting heavily involved on the HBO sports side with documentaries and, trying to create some stuff on that end. HBO Now, which I think is a lot of their business is going toward. In 5 years, I think we're seeing right now, you're seeing people dropping cable and satellite.
Cord cutting.
Yeah, the cord cutters are happening. And you got to be ready with the streaming side. So they know their business is going there, and they're going to take some chances. They're going to hire people and try to figure out how to draw people to that app. But, I still have to figure out where I'm going to write and how much I want to write, what I have time to do. I think the one thing I learned from ESPN was, especially the last couple years, I was trying to do too many things. And, I was able to do them, but when I finally left, it took, a couple months just to kind of recover from it. I mean, I'm sure you had that with, what year was that, 85 when you stepped back in tennis?
86, yeah.
86?
Still recovering.
You step away and you're just like, wow, this is great. I'm just going to go to the movies. Like, not working is really fun.
For a while.
So I got to get back in that flow, which I am. So I'll figure it out.
You're a frantic tweeter. I mean, I guess,
I'm frantic's a little strong.
Well, busy. Your thumbs are flying. It's going to happen.
True. I have a BlackBerry. I'm the last one.
I only have a fake John McEnroe tweeter.
Nice.
Are you allowed on Twitter?
It's probably best that for the moment I stay off it.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Based on my past history.
Too.
But I do have someone who apparently has 20,000 followers, which include my 6 kids.
Nice.
Who think it's very funny.
At
So I
least-
hear about what I'm supposed to be saying all the time.
At least they listen to Fake Dad.
They listen to Fake Dad, and the fake tweeter actually says a lot of things that you would think would be coming out of my mouth. So
Wow.
there is a lot of technologically astute people that have been here the last 24 to 48 hours. So I'll make a request that you could help me find who this person is. I would appreciate it.
Get him paid. So I wonder about mediums, first of all, in sports, because we've got sort of two divergent trends going on with mediums. So on one hand, ESPN is sort of increasingly dominant in the world of sports and controlling more and more games. Monday Night Football, it's hard to even imagine that would have been on cable, and of course.
I actually think they're a little less dominant than they were because they're buying everything up and paying billions of dollars for it. However, there's other people in the other networks that are saying, why does ESPN have this situation where they can have commercials and advertising, and people are trying to figure out ways as we speak, I believe, to sort of level the playing field for a lot of these networks that are going after the same thing. I mean, I think the beauty about sports, for example, is that people sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but they like to watch it live.
Right.
Unlike most other things where you can go to HBO on demand or whatever you want to go to. And that's a huge thing. So there's this huge issue, I think, because we were sort of thinking about sports journalism a little bit. And you have this situation where a lot of people like to watch live TV, sports, and then you have journalists that are part of what appears to be a struggling industry, like magazines.
I mean, when you get Sports Illustrated every week in the mail, like I still do, I used to write for Sports Illustrated. It's tragic how thin that magazine is, and the great journalism used to happen there that doesn't happen there.
My goal was, as a player, when I used to play way back when, was if I ever made it to the cover of Sports Illustrated, that was like, hitting gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it's like sports. It's really sort of sad. And so I'm thinking, for journalists, now they have another issue. They have, people like Derek Jeter, for example, that are starting his own thing where like players can sort of bypass, if you want to, we were saying,
Yeah,
the
we were talking
middleman
about
a
that
little
before.
bit.
Well, what's that like now when you've got players who have those opportunities to tweet directly to their fans, to control their own voice, to not get asked difficult questions? I mean, is the character of what goes on in the locker room after a game to interview a player, does that change because the players don't feel like they have to talk to the reporters anymore?
I think it's changed from his era. Can I call it his era without making you feel old?
Back in the
the
prehistoric
1980s
days.
But like, I think a good example that I like to use is David Halberstam wrote, I thought, the best sports book ever called Breaks of the Game, where he followed the Portland Trailblazers for a year. I think it was the 79-80 season. And he's interviewing everybody, and he's just part of the team, and he's going to dinner with these guys and really captures what that team was like. And then 20 years later, he tried to basically do the repeat of that book with Michael Jordan, and it was about Jordan's last season. It's a really good book. Jordan wouldn't give him any access. And he was like, at the end of the year, I'll give you a big interview. He never did. So somewhere between those two books, things changed. But now things have really changed because, and I wrote a magazine column about this actually in 2009, because I could feel it happening with Twitter. Twitter was the first thing that allowed athletes to just bypass the media.
Right.
To be like, I'm going to get my message out. My teammate got traded. I'm going to go right to Twitter and say something about it. Or I didn't like that this happened. Or here's what I think about this. And now you have Instagram. Now you have the Players Tribune. And you have all these different ways where they have all the control now. And you watch press conferences, and they suck. You know, the press conferences after games are terrible because they know they don't have to say anything. And when they want to say something, it's usually in some sort of arranged puff piece type of magazine thing where they get the cover and they quote unquote open up for an hour, but they don't really open up.
Can I defend the athlete for a second?
Yes, please do.
Because back when I was playing, for example, we often had people cover our events in my sport, tennis, that would cover, we'd go play at an event in Philadelphia, for example, and the people that would cover it would only cover the sport of tennis that 1 week a year.
Right.
And tennis is trickier because it's a one-on-one game. So they didn't have the access they were used to. Maybe there was more access back then, the 70s, 80s, for a hockey game or a basketball game. And they'd be all bent of shape, and they totally dump on, the players. They'd say tennis is crap, it sucks. And we'd be sitting there like feeling like, who the hell are these people? They don't know our sport at all.
Right.
Not only do athletes feel that like journalists are frustrated athletes, which is part of what you're like, oh, who the hell are you talking? Name a journalist, maybe you can name one, but I don't know a single journalist that doesn't wish they were the athlete.
It's a great point.
And then they're saying, then now think of it, fast forward 35, 40 years. You've got people that feel in order to be, get attention, they got to be louder, more bombastic, have stronger opinions.
You're talking about the journalists.
The journalists I'm talking about. So why the hell would a player, who's, saying these outlandish things when the player feels like, hey, you know what it's like to be out there? What I would respect.
Which we saw this week with Stephen A. Smith and Kevin Durant.
Well, it's interesting because with actual writing, I actually think things have gotten a lot calmer with, the hot take culture. Everyone has mocked that so relentlessly for the last 10 years in sports blogs and Twitter, and like the kind of pieces John's talking about where in 1982 somebody just trashes tennis and they don't understand it. That person would get trashed
in the Daily
now.
News, yeah.
But on TV, it does seem like, the louder you are and the more quote-unquote provocative you are, and you get a reaction, that's actually a good thing. And like Stephen A. Smith this week, I actually like Stephen A. Smith. I did a podcast with him in March, and he kind of stripped down the shtick, and it was really interesting to talk to him. I think he's a really interesting guy. I think he's a good guy, but
he has a shtick in real life.
He has a shtick. Yeah, he does. But what he said to Durant, and I actually liked his point. His point was that.
You want to paraphrase what he said?
Well, basically his point. Durant was mad at him for something he said, and his point was like, you can't be so sensitive. You're a public figure. Like you have to. Durant's been coddled in Oklahoma City. It's like a little college town. They only have one team. And those guys are really sensitive, and they take everything personally. So that was his point, whether you agree with it or not. But then at the end, he threatens them, and he says, you don't want to make an enemy out of me. It's like, what is happening? How is this on television right now?
And how is it still journalism? I mean,
that's not journalism.
Can I just finish? Me personally, what I do respect And if someone who followed my sport or follows another sport for years at a time, and we get to know the person, I found it quite interesting, and I would look forward to if not all, obviously I preferred it if I won some big event, how they handled it the next day at the U.S. Open. But if there was a Mike Lupica back in his early days and he was writing something.
Yeah, he loved tennis.
He used to be around tennis all the time, as an example. And so, there was writers that followed the sport. It was a great time for me. But if they constructively criticized me, which I certainly deserved at times, to be criticized, I respected that. It's the people that sort of, come in half-assed, half-baked, and sort of like that's where it leads to something where the players, and let's face it, these teams, we have it, in tennis, we're out there sort of by ourselves, and we've got to handle this all on their own. These teams, you mentioned like Durant, they tell you what to say, and God forbid, you say anything about anyone in the team, and you look at the sports now, why don't you, as opposed to criticizing the athletes, for example, why don't you go after the people that own like the football team? Some of the things that like what's his name, Greg Hardy just said with the Cowboys. Go after Jerry Jones, and what the hell's going on here?
Well, and that's something where you look at a situation like Milwaukee, where these guys bought the Bucks.
Right.
They knew they had the city of Seattle, which I always call the extortion city.
Right.
Like the NBA and the NFL have their extortion cities where
the NFL
they basically,
Los Angeles and
and it's like if you don't build a team, we could go here, and they like to keep that city empty. And these guys bought the
baseball,
Bucks.
it was Tampa Bay for the longest time.
Yeah, so these guys bought the Bucks. They gave little tiny pieces of the team to different politicians. They had the Seattle card, and they finagled it so that somehow these people in Milwaukee are paying for part of the stadium that they're going to build, the arena. And these guys are billionaires, and it's like the old joke, if this was such a great business deal, why aren't you the one paying for it? Because it's not. And the whole myth of making the city pay for not just arenas, but even something like the Olympics, where Los Angeles is really the only American city that could handle the Olympics. The fact that it was going to be in Boston, first of all, it was idiotic because they don't have half the facilities. Also, it's the most provincial place on the planet, and you're going to have all these people coming in there. I heard this, I was like, this is like a bad idea jeans commercial, where Boston, they hate when people come for the head of the Charles. You're going to have the Olympics? So naturally, the Boston people banded together and threw that whole bit away. But yeah, I agree with John. Like, I do feel like we concentrate too much on athletes and not the whole infrastructure of the sports.
I'll end the business of sports to that as well. Just to your point about the athletes, also, I feel like there was a moment for me when I was at a Knicks game. Charles Smith was trying to make a layup. It got blocked twice. Knicks. You remember
I think it was 5 times. But
yes. Well, I think there was only 2 actual blocks, but he couldn't get it in.
He got 5.
It felt like 5.
Yeah.
But afterwards, in the locker room, a lot of the reporters were asking these questions like, "Why'd you miss?" And I felt for him because he clearly did not want to miss. He clearly was trying to put the ball in. And I think that there was this kind of dynamic with the reporters dealing with the athletes where it was a gotcha game.
Well, back in the older days, the difference in salary, for example, to be blunt, between a journalist and an athlete wasn't nearly as great as it is now. So I think some of that comes from, I don't want to say jealousy, but I guess I'm going to say it, that, there's this huge discrepancy. And, that's not always the case. I know Bill has done extremely well, and some other journalists have done very well.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Financially, and God bless them if they do. But again, it's sort of like they feel like this need to attack the person who's out there. Like I look at football players, for example. I'm got it easy as a tennis player, I believe. These guys are like gladiators from the old days in the Roman Colosseum, and 95, 99% of them don't have guaranteed contracts. And they're tossed out like it's nothing. People are like all over these players in a lot of ways. And meanwhile, these like multi-billionaires like running this team. And they seem to be like above it all. And I find that to be where like there could be a much better spirit that would allow sort of, because the future of sports journalism to me is somewhat bleak. If you think about it,
Well, is that because of the media? Because we have all these mediums where journalism is suffering because the models are changing, right? When advertising moved from print to online, when it was more measured, the rates came down, and so writers get paid even less now than they did when they're writing. I mean, you put together,
that pisses them off even more.
You put together a really sort of amazing product with Grantland.
That's not the athlete's fault.
I'm not blaming the athletes. But talk to me about Grantland and what you thought you were trying to do there. You put together a really great staff who wrote some terrific pieces, including like a long piece about juggling. It's one of the best pieces I've read in the last year or so.
Well, it's funny because Grantland started kind of as a response to where everything was going, and at the time people thought the blogs were winning. Everything had to be short and fast and immediate, and you had to have quick takes on everything. And I knew that wasn't true because I had a column that a lot of people were reading, and my columns are like 17,000 words. So I knew that people, if it was something they wanted to read, would actually read it. So we kind of swung the other way. But what we didn't see, and this is why I don't think it's as bleak as John just said, because it's more fun to read now than it was in 2010 and 1981 or whatever, because you have iPads and iPhones, and by the fourth year of Grantland, 55% of ESPN's traffic was on mobile. And that was something when we built Grantland, I didn't care about design. Like I just cared about the words and who we were hiring. And eventually the design became so important. And I think going forward, I think there's going to be a lot of good ways to get good writing out. The question for me is the access, the position that some of the bigger media companies are in, because you were talking earlier, you said ESPN was in a great position and John disagreed. And you both were right, because ESPN is in a great position because live rights are the best they've ever been. Like that's what you want. You want live rights for anything. And
in an era where you can fast forward every other kind
and
of
you
programming.
Want to tweet and experience and social media, all that stuff. But there's more competitors for those live rights. And that places a premium on their deals with the leagues. And I think the way you've seen ESPN cover the NFL the last year has been really shaky, and some of the stuff like the Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, the Deflategate was embarrassing because ESPN was in the middle of that story with bad reporting. And then when everyone kind of turned on Goodell in July and August, you didn't really see anything on ESPN. You saw it everywhere else, but from an opinion standpoint, you didn't see it. And it's hard to watch that stuff and say, well, wait a second, this is their biggest partner. Are they holding back a little,
Do you think they were?
I do. I absolutely think
Don't you think the other networks were holding back also?
Yeah, I think CBS was too. I think all of them were.
Just as bad as the other.
Because they need the rights. And it's like they're not going to criticize them because it's their biggest money partner they have. So that balance is, I think that's a work in progress.
Do the leagues, whether it's the conference, you've got the SEC channel, you've got a Pac-12 channel, you've got an NFL channel, you've got an NBA channel. For the most part,
tennis channel.
For the tennis channel, you got a golf channel, but that's different, right? Because those aren't owned by those leagues.
Right.
But the leagues own those football channels, the Major League Baseball channel. But presently, those channels don't get any important exclusive games, right?
Because they can make more money selling the games.
But it sits out there as a threat.
Eventually. Yeah.
Do you think that threat's going to be realized, where all the NFL games or many of them are going to be the NFL channel? And many of the SEC games, the football games, the interconference football games that are big will be on the SEC channel, where you can't watch an Alabama game unless you're being broadcast by the SEC, and so there's no real critical journalism happening because the provider of the thing is the broadcaster of the thing.
Yeah, I think all this stuff's a work in progress, and I also think what's going to happen with the cord cutting over the next 5-6 years is going to determine a lot of this stuff, because I see it with my kids. I have my son's almost 8 and my daughter is 10, and they don't know when anything's on. They're just used to buttons, my show's on.
Yep.
And they love Last Man on Earth, which I'm probably a bad father for letting them watch. But so that first episode was on Sunday night, 9:30, and they were like, 9:30, when's 9:30 getting here? It was like the first time I'd seen them excited for the time of a show. But that whole generation, they're not going to care about cable or satellite. If you're going to college now, when I went to college, we were like, who's going to have cable? How are we going to get it? Now it's like you just hook up to the internet feed.
Well, and cord cutting is bad news for ESPN, probably, right? Because as much as people want to watch the sports that they've gotten, they're buying the live rights to get the live broadcast, a lot of houses in America don't want to pay what they're paying for ESPN effectively through their
Well, I think ESPN is going to be fine. There's certainly going to be people that are going to try to, move in. That's understandable. They're like the 800-pound gorilla, right? I mean, they're unbelievably successful the last 30 years. Why wouldn't people try to figure out what they're doing? That's what it's all about, isn't it? They're going to come out and try to figure out a way to do that. And so the weird part is that they're paying not just ESPN, all these networks. I mean, and you turn on a Saturday, I'm not a big college football fan. I'm more of a professional football fan.
Me too.
There's 25 college games on in New York. When I turn on every station's like a college game. I'm like, how is this going to be successful? How could this keep working? I mean,
and John's right. ESPN, all right, so maybe they won't make $8 billion. They'll make $6. Like, they're going to be fine. Like, it's not going to be like Polaroid going.
Right.
Down.
I look at direction, right? Yeah.
It's just, oh, too bad we're not going to make a gajillion dollars.
Yeah.
Was Grantland profitable?
It was probably like right around even, but I think, this is going to sound like sour grapes, but so much of it has to do with the priorities of how you sell stuff. And we were a boutique site in a company that's built to sell Monday Night Football and, the big baseball and the big properties. That's the college football championship. And when they sell stuff in bulk. So they, Subway's $75 million and stuff like that. And that's how their ad sales work, and it works. They make a ton of money. I think our issue was when you're a smaller website, you have to hustle and you got to do quicker deals. Like, we didn't make any money on podcasts, which is crazy to me because now I'm seeing that whole podcast world is really lucrative. There were ways we could have made, there were ways we could have made money in their sponsored studio and all kinds of different things. And, that part was frustrating. And it was definitely part of the reason that I started having issues.
What is it like within ESPN? The product looks slick. What's it like to work behind the doors? You're still there.
I don't work there anymore, so John should answer this.
Usually the people who used to work there give you better answers than people who do.
I'm not I have worked for ESPN not in the same way that Bill did. He was more all in.
Yeah.
I love the sport that I grew up playing, and I love to cover the big events if I can. I've been lucky enough to play for a long time and then be able to be part of it in a tiny way as a commentator. So, you sort of roll with the punches a little bit,
yes.
At least for me. I think it's a great gig to be able to go to Wimbledon. It's like our Augusta or, it's Super Bowl. And then I grew up and live in New York and, being the U.S. Open and doing night matches and being part of that's amazing. And, it's not the toughest thing in the world to go for a couple weeks to Paris in May and June.
Yeah.
So,